Hello, Spark fans and fabricators, and pretty much anyone trying to build a lake right now. So this is Advancing Spark, brought to you by Advancing Analytics, your friendly neighborhood engineering, AI, and analytics consultancy. And we've been building lakes for a while. And there's suddenly a state where everyone wants to talk about the Medallion Architecture. Fabrics come along and they've said, hey, look, everything's a lake now. We're building lakes, and one of the well-known patterns to build lakes is the Medallion Architecture. You should use that. And so there's a massive influx of people who didn't really get involved in lakes before, now trying to build it and now discussing what the Medallion Architecture means. Now that is great. I am so happy that so many more people are entering the lake-based ecosystem. Come on in, the water's lovely. We make lots of water-based puns here in the lake world. But actually how you structure a lake and how you work with data moving through the zones of curation until you get something you're ready to show the business is something we've been doing for a long time. It's actually very well understood. However, the Medallion Architecture is a very simple way of explaining it, which doesn't quite fit every scenario, doesn't fit every business. So of course there's going to be lots of arguments going, no, that's not what we do at the bronze layer, we do that in the silver layer. No, silver means this. And people are arguing about what we do at different stages of this curation, whereas actually, it's fairly well known, but not if you just take it as bronze, silver, gold, and that's all we ever do. So all I want to do today is just take that concept, talk about how it actually works, talk about how we've been building lakes for the past most of a decade, and then you can take that and do whatever you want. Because realistically, the main thing is you do not have to follow any prescribed way of building a lake. You don't have to call the layers of your lake anything particular. Call them whatever makes sense for your business. It is so the people using data understand what the data in that particular zone, how it can be read, how it should be processed, how it should be trusted. And if you get that communicated well, you can call those zones of your lake 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I do not care. But make sure you understand it and you have an operating model. Your business and everyone using your lakes understand what that means. That's the most important part. If you decide to call it bronze, silver, gold, great. Go for it. Just make sure you have decided what you're doing. But I want to give you the context of how we do things in all the different layers, so you can at least make an informed decision. That is the point of today. If you're new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, let us know what you've called your lake zones, because I've heard some really interesting ones and really fun ones. And that's great. Do it. Make it fun. Okay, so the traditional Medallion Architecture, we're talking bronze, silver, gold. So we're getting data from a load of different sources in the business. That could be scraped from an API, it could be sent to us from a third-party vendor, it could be the business uploading their own data, could be a nice regular ETL job, pulling data from a SQL server, whatever. We get data from loads of different places, and it enters our lake-based environment. So the bronze data is untrusted, it's uncleaned. You have to work hard to be able to go and actually draw out insights from it. The data might be wrong. It might have test data and dummy data. It might have missing data and be incorrect. Bronze comes with a pinch of salt going, oh, can you trust it? Now, silver is then validated and cleansed. We've tidied it up. We've gotten rid of any bad data. We've performed some data cleansing exercises. You can go and use it and query it, but we've not made it nice to understand. Probably in its original schema. So if that came from some kind of application, OLTP kind of server, well, it's going to be very normalized. You're going to have to try and figure out how all this stuff joins together. We've not applied any business calculations to help you actually work out what does the profit KPI mean or anything like that. It is good, clean, validated, trustworthy data that's not being made ready for the business to understand. Gold is your analytical tables. It is aggregated data. Now, that doesn't just mean it's being summarized. It could mean it's been data from various different things pulled together and made ready for the business to consume. It's been modeled in such a way that the business can understand it. It's been turned from here's a load of system named tables into here's a load of things named in such a way that the business user will understand what that means. We've performed some data modeling. We've made it business facing. Now that makes sense. It was like, yeah, okay, easy, fine, yeah, great, we'll do that. But actually each of those layers probably breaks down into several additional layers, and that's where all the confusion's coming from. So, wind back, where did this come from? Well, Databricks, when they put out Delta Lake. They were trying to explain how this stuff works for people. And actually, they were going very much for the more data science kind of machine learning style of doing things. And they were pushing this idea of bronze, silver, gold. Now, personally, I hate that naming. We work with a ton of data governance people, and bronze, silver, gold is well understood in data governance about how much you should trust the provenance of that data. And whilst we're talking about a very similar concept here, we're talking about how well curated the data is, not how trustworthy it is. So if the business made their own data set, and yeah, we can clean that and we can present it, but is that trustworthy because it was actually coming from a user and not coming from a formally managed source? It's different. The trustworthiness of the data is different to how curated that data is. So I've already got a definition in my head for bronze, silver, gold, which is why I've struggled with the medallion architecture. But if that makes sense to you, if you're not using those terms already, cool, it makes sense. And we're following the same pattern, right? Raw integration style data coming in, filtered, cleaned, augmented data in our silver layer, and then we're putting out business facing aggregated data. Again, aggregates does not just mean summarized, but still doesn't make sense to me. That is not the be all and end all. And actually, if you dig into some of the documentation, if you go and have a look at recommendations as to how to do something like Data Vault in a medallion architecture, well, the silver layer just has several different layers to it. There's sub layers inside these things, and that's what people miss. So, ignoring Databricks, ignoring Microsoft recommendations, ignoring everybody else, I wanted to tell you about how advancing analytics, how we build lakes, how we think about the different stages of processing that we go through, and then you can call it whatever you want to call it, give it your own names, I don't care. But this is what we normally see. So firstly, we have some raw files. Now, even if we're going off and getting the data ourselves, we still just land it as flat files. And this is an argument people have had for decades around ETL. Go, if I'm pulling from a structured source, why would I put it to somewhere that's then unstructured? Madness, I say. I'm going to lose accuracy. Well, actually, we disagree. Because these days, we store things as Parquet. We either store it as JSON or Parquet, depending on if we want to have things as really nested and have good structured structs, nested arrays, all types of complex data types in there. That's quite nice. A lot of the time, we receive JSON because we're calling a REST API. Therefore, it just comes out of JSON. We're going to keep the data in the format that we were given it. If we're extracting the data ourselves, we put it as Parquet. And then it's structured and it's typed. It is still accurate and it's in Spark ready types. So it just makes sense to do that. So raw files as we received it. Now, the main reason we do that is because we want to have a little checkpoint that divorces, that abstracts us from the source system. Because the age-old reason why people do business intelligence ETL loads overnight is because they aren't allowed to go back and query the application server during the day because they don't want to put unnecessary load on it. Now, in the world of the cloud, we have separation of compute and storage for lots of things. That doesn't tend to be a case for lots of the systems that we deal with, but it still happens occasionally. And there's still a lot of network I/O problems with going back to the source system if it's a problem. So as a default standard to protect ourselves and mean we can just do whatever we want and fix our own problems and be masters of our own destiny, we just land everything we load into the lake in a landing area as raw files, and then it's ours to do with as we please. We then pick those files up and we check it against our expected schema. So I'm expecting this file to look like this. Oh, that's the wrong file type, or it's the wrong shape. It's missing a load of data. It's got a load of extra data. We have schema validation that we are doing. And that might mean that we chuck whole files away. It might mean we break the load and we throw errors. It might mean that we reject a couple of rows because they just did not meet our structural validation checks. And that's, again, when we want to be able to go back to our raw files and check it. And we can have that little loop of fixing data at that point. Now, that is different to when we're talking about the silver layer cleansing data and applying business logic to clean data and fixing dates and removing special characters from strings and all that data quality stuff. It's not what we're talking about. We're saying, can this actually fit in the structure I need it to? So we have two layers, both of which could be considered bronze. And people argue the definition of bronze going, no, it's files in the original format. No, it's files that have been structured into a delta table, but that might just have some problems in there. And the answer for us is it's both. We do both of those things as two separate layers in our lake, but you could still call it bronze. And that's why there are these arguments around it. Now that schema validated layer, it's append only. We're just putting data in there. We're not checking that record already exists. That is just a pure record of structurally valid rows that have come but are still raw. They might be corrupt. They might be test records. They might be utter garbage in there, but it fits into the structure that we're trying to get it to be. So that's the first two layers that we're talking about. We then pick it up and we apply data cleansing. We apply our cleaning rules. Now, I don't want to do fixing dates and applying primary keys and doing all that change management stuff. At the same time, I'm saying, does this file even make sense? Is it even a valid JSON or Parquet file? They are two separate actions and two different recovery points that I need to work with. So we separate those out as layers. So my next layer, that is traditional Silver. But it is applying cleansing, applying validation, probably doing a merge. So you've got a single record for each unique row that we're talking about. You might be tracking history in here. You might make every table slowly changing. You might be doing some kind of data vaulty labby thing. Not my jam. People do it. But that is one layer of our cleansed and validated data. However, we work with loads of companies who have 4 or 5 different business units, and they've all got their own ERP system or CRM system, and they need to conform that clean, valid data into a single set of, right, this is what we mean when we say product. This is all of our customers. This is all of our things. And that's not analytical data yet. They've not remodeled that data to fit into a star schema or one big table so it can go into some kind of report. It's still Silver layer data. So we have like this conforming, nice, homogeneous schema that is still Silver data. So again, we've got multiple layers in Silver that we tend to think about. And again, people argue over which one of those is actually the Silver layer, and the answer is both. And then we do some data modeling finally. Now, I tend to do things most in the Kimball style, so we're making facts, we're making dimensions. We might have several different layers of aggregation here. So I might have my big transaction level fact table, and then an aggregated summary fact table, and then some kind of accumulating snapshot. That's all still just analytical models in that same first of the gold layers. Now, when we get to things like Power BI and we have BI tools that have some contextual cutting and slicing and calculations that are filter context dependent, that's technically a different layer. So we have like a reporting layer, which will have calculations in, which is on top of the star schema Kimball style layer, which has its own calculations in. So again, we think about it as two separate layers. You've got a layer of anyone can go and query that star schema and it's materialized down. Yes, you could do it as a logical layer, but if you're doing things like surrogate keys or you're doing things like managing slowly changing dimensions, it's a hell of a lot easier to actually materialize that down in the lake and then just performance of people reusing it and using it a lot. So that analytical layer model for us is a materialized star schema and a bunch of analytical tables we might have off top of it, and then a semantic layer on top of it, which is doing your cut and slice style on the fly calculations. So yes, you could say we're using the Medallion architecture. We just happen to have a couple of bronze, a couple of silver, and a couple of gold. Now, I don't see the need to try and actually squeeze what we're doing into that definition. If that's going to help your users understand context, great. If your business is already bought into the Medallion architecture, they want to come and talk to you and go, right, is this from the gold layer? No, it's from the silver layer. And they want to use that parlance, those semantics. Fine, great. Label your layers that way, but don't feel like you're only allowed to have one step in each of those 3 layers, because it doesn't always make sense that way. Companies are different. Loads of companies we work with don't have that conformed clean layer because they don't have multiple different source systems that are talking about the same thing. They don't need to conform data across multiple sources. That's cool. Just don't have that layer. It is not a fixed, prescribed way of doing things. It's a data model that should fit your business. So what do we call it? We have a different name for these things because we have been building this for long before people started talking about the Medallion architecture. So that first initial file dump, we just called the landing zone. So we have our landing blob, maybe multiple landing blobs aligned to different source systems. However you want to build it, we have a landing area of the raw files that we received. We then have the raw layer, which is our schema validated, append-only log of all the records that we received, not yet quality checked. Now, the one that people tend to kind of have a problem with, so baselined, you could call that standardized, you call all that cleansed. I don't care what you call it, we call it base, is our clean validated view. You can treat it almost like an operational data store. But no, yes, it's basically, if everything's going really, really well, our base layer just shows the same data that's in the source system with some auditing and logging tracked onto it. And it's cleaned any of the garbage data it had in there. That's how we can check that things are good and happy. Enriched is what we call our conformed layer. We have a bunch of clients doing different things. Maybe they just use it as a glorified staging area. Maybe they're doing some pre-calculations before they turn it into an analytical model. Maybe they're going for a full canonical model. They have this thing they're trying to get all the different source systems into. Again, it's a flexible layer that we can use as makes sense with how our various different clients that we're working with need to use their data. Curated is what we call our actual data model. And again, multiple different layers inside there. And the final layer, we tend to refer to as the semantic model. If you're being new and trendy, you can call it your metric layer, because technically our curated layer is using the semantics of the business, so it's the metric layer that's doing all the calculations. I don't care. The important thing is that the users, the data personas across your entire data estate, when you say to them, hey, here's some data, just look at this table, it's in base.customer table. They go, base. Okay, cool. So I understand you've not applied any business calculations for me, but I can trust that that data has been cleansed. Great. They've got context from the layer of the lake. That's all we're trying to do. If you give someone something from curated.fact sales, they go, great, curated. That means someone's applied some calculations and business logic to me. That means I can go and look up the definitions of these different fields because it's been well modeled and properly documented because everyone documents their data. If you say to someone, yeah, sure, just go and look in this table in raw, I go, oh, okay, so one, I need to know how to query that data. I need to dedupe it most likely. There's going to be some garbage data in there. Maybe there's some data that's only like it's partly malformed and they've got some fields that don't make any sense because it's raw data and it's not been cleaned yet. That's all it is. It's about setting context. It's about setting a process. It's building an operating model for how data gets from its original raw state through to being business ready in a trustworthy, repeatable way. All we're trying to do. If what you're doing in your business doesn't need all of those layers, great. Combine some of the layers and do it once. You're making that decision about how to do it. If you're saying I want to go from essentially a raw state all the way through to a curated state, and you want to build in the risk that if something goes wrong, you need to reprocess data, fine, cool. That is a business decision. That's how you're designing your architecture. If you are saying we need to go through every single state because I want to capture the data and be able to replay it at any point, great. They're the layers that we tend to go through. You may want to break it up even more. That's up to you. Just don't feel that you have to squeeze it into a bronze, silver, gold layer. And don't feel that you have to use someone else's definition of bronze, silver, gold for how that should work. Because it's very confused. Because it's more complicated than that, honestly. If you want to actually extend the Medallion architecture and say, well, it's not bronze, silver, gold, it's bronze, silver, gold, and platinum or diamond to represent my semantic layer. Or you've got tin to represent your lending layer. That's cool. Call things whatever you want. The best examples I have seen is when people have actually taken these zones of the lake and actually renamed it something that made sense inside their business. You could be a gaming company who actually name it after their famous kind of whatever kind of brand the game they're selling. You could be a manufacturing company that name it after the different stages of their manufacturing as things go from warehouse through to distribution. Honestly, well, I wouldn't tend to do that because you're going to get really confused. Going to warehouse data, that's in the warehouse layer, and then we can get the warehouse table or the warehouse table in the warehouse layer. That gets really confusing. But call it something that makes sense so your users understand it and they actually know what they're getting. That's all you need to do. And the final thing is it's not an architecture. I hate that it's called the Medallion Architecture because it's not an architecture. It's a data layout approach. It doesn't actually involve any infrastructure or solution design. Okay. And honestly, that is all I wanted to talk about today. So if you're trying to build a Medallion architecture, you're trying to build a Lakehouse, and you're trying to figure out what steps should I go through, whether you're using Databricks, whether you're using Fabric, whether you're building it your own, using Spark somewhere else, wherever you happen to be, they tend to be the different layers that we go through. They tend to be the different stages at which case we materialize data down into the lake. We tend to keep all of the data that actually goes through those layers. That's an important change. And honestly, this hasn't changed that much from the days of warehousing when we had a staging schema and a clean schema and a warehousing database, and we just move things through these things. The difference is, in the traditional warehousing world, we tend to truncate the earlier parts of that each time we did a load because we're worried about disk capacity on the various different bits of tin we're building our warehouses on. Lakes tend to be a lot cheaper, and they tend to be so scalable we don't really care. So we tend to keep the data in these different layers, and we have a load of different use cases. Your data scientists might go and query the raw layer. This is a great place to find signals for things like insurance fraud, which once you've cleaned your data, you've lost those signals. There are use cases for each of those different layers about why people might go and query that data and how long you should keep that data there. There's a lot more depth that goes into managing all of this stuff. But that first thing, when you sit down and go, right, gonna build a lake house, how should I structure it? You don't have to stick to bronze, silver, gold. You can come up with your own definition of what that means to you. There may be way more steps than 3 involved in your eventual journey from your file format through to your end data model that is being used by the business. And just call it what makes sense to you. That's the whole point. Cool. So that is the end of my rant. That is all I wanted to share with people. It's all the frustrations I need to get off my chest as someone building lake houses for quite a long time now and seeing a sudden rush of people arguing about what they actually mean. That's what they mean. That is how we build them. And yeah, if you need any help building a lake house, feel free to get hold of Advancing Analytics. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.